All right, so you wanted to take a look at that Kamala Harris interview on Fox News. We're doing a deep dive into Zachary Folk's piece over at the Daily Beast.
Yeah, it's an interesting choice for her to go on Fox News. It seems kind of like a calculated move to go into what some might consider the lion's den,
Yeah.
to speak to an audience that may not be receptive.
And you have Bret Baier, right, who's known as a pretty tough interviewer, particularly with Democrats, and he jumps right into it with a really hot button issue right now, illegal immigration. He even cites that figure, 6 million releases under the Biden administration.
Yeah, and that number's really interesting, right? Because regardless of whether she confirms it or denies it, it immediately becomes a talking point. It frames the issue in a way that puts her on the defensive from the very beginning.
Yeah, and then he brings up these families of murder victims, and they're blaming the administration for the deaths of their loved ones.
Yeah, using those personal stories, those tragedies, you know.
Yeah.
It's a tough thing for her to respond to. Because she has to, express sympathy.
Yeah.
But also not fuel the narrative that they're trying to put forward.
And she kind of does this interesting dance where she offers condolences and then immediately pivots back to Trump-era policies. It's like, how do you even respond to that type of emotional appeal without getting caught in this political trap?
Yeah, it's a really difficult situation. And it really highlights how these political interviews are just as much about strategy as they are about, conveying information.
Yeah. Okay, so then he throws kind of curveball. He brings up the issue of transgender care for federal prisoners.
Right.
He even pulls out a Trump campaign ad that accuses her of supporting taxpayer-funded sex changes.
Which, again, it's another kind of like appeal to a certain segment of the electorate, right, to try to box her into a corner on this issue.
Yeah, but then she flips the script on him, and she points out that this policy existed under Trump.
Right.
So she's basically saying, like, this isn't anything new.
This was.
And you were fine with it then.
Right, exactly.
So why is it an issue now?
It's a very clever countermaneuver.
Yeah.
Because it kind of neutralizes that attack.
Yeah.
And it shifts the focus back on to Trump and his record.
Exactly. But he keeps pressing the issue.
Yeah.
He's trying to get a straight answer out of her. And this is where I think we see an example of what you might call strategic ambiguity, where she kind of avoids giving a direct yes or no answer. You guys want to have that used against her potentially in campaign ads.
Right, exactly.
But it just makes you wonder, like, is there ever any room for a genuine conversation about any of these issues?
That's a great question. And I think in this type of format, it's very, very difficult because it's almost like they're more focused on scoring political points than actually having a dialogue.
Exactly. Okay, so then he goes on and he asks her about Biden's age and his mental fitness, which is obviously something that has been circulating around in right-wing media a lot.
Right.
So it's interesting that he brings it up in this context.
Yeah, and even just by asking the question, it kind of plants a seed in the minds of the viewers, regardless of what her response is.
Right. And her response is really interesting because she says, Joe Biden is not on the ballot. And Donald Trump is. It's like she's completely shutting down that line of questioning.
Yeah. And she's also very cleverly redirecting the focus back to the choice that voters have in this election.
So it's all very strategic.
Very strategic.
Every word, every phrase.
Absolutely.
It's a game of chess.
It is.
And then it gets really interesting because he challenges her on this idea that Americans are ready to move on from Trump.
Yeah.
And he brings up Trump's continued popularity among Republicans.
Yeah.
And even ask her, like, why would so many people support someone who you consider to be so detrimental to the country?
Yeah. It's a very pointed question.
It is. And then he follows that up with, are they misguided to 50%?
Wow.
Are they stupid?
He's mean.
I was shocked that he actually said that.
Yeah, he's using very strong language to try to elicit a response.
Right. And she handles it masterfully. She says, oh, God, I would never say that about the American people.
Right.
Which I think is the perfect response.
Yeah. She avoids insulting those voters.
Exactly.
But she also doesn't condone their beliefs.
Right.
It's a very difficult balance to strike.
And she does it so well.
Yeah.
It's incredible to watch.
It really is. Like you said, it's a masterclass in political communication.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it makes you realize just how much of a performance it really is. It's not just about, like, substance. It's about presentation. It's about optics.
Yeah. And this is a great example of that because you can see how both of them are very carefully crafting their responses to control the narrative.
Exactly.
And to appeal to their respective audiences.
And it makes you wonder, in a way, like, are we so focused on the performance that we're missing the substance? Like, are we so busy analyzing the strategy and the optics that we're forgetting about the actual issues at hand?
That's a really good point. And I think that's something that's really important to keep in mind. When we're looking at any kind of political media, it's very easy to get caught up in the horse race aspect of it and who's up and who's down.
Right.
But we also need to remember that there are real issues at stake.
Exactly.
And that these issues have real consequences for people's lives.
Absolutely. So as we move on and talk about the enemy within comments, I think it's going to be interesting to see how they kind of grapple with that.
Yeah.
Because that's where it really starts to feel like a clash of ideologies.
Absolutely. I think that's a great place to pick up.
Yeah, so we left off talking about those enemy within comments. And I feel like that's where it went from, like a strategic dance to like a full-on clash of ideologies.
Yeah, when Baier brings up an enemy within comment, Harris doesn't hold back.
Right.
She calls out the danger of those words, how they can incite violence, undermine democracy.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you see this real contrast in how they frame Trump's words.
Yeah.
Baier kind of tries to downplay it. Like, oh, it's just tough talk. It's a way to energize his base.
Right, like it's just Trump being Trump. But she's framing it as a threat to, like, American society, a dog whistle to extremist groups.
Right, and I think for a lot of people, it probably depends on your existing views. If you're inclined to see Trump as, like, a strong leader, then you're probably more likely to hear it, the way that Baier is framing it.
Right.
But if you're already kind of wary of Trump's rhetoric, then her words are going to resonate much more strongly.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this whole interview so fascinating to me. It's not just about what they're saying, but it's about how it lands on an audience that already has, a set of beliefs and biases.
It's like we're watching the same thing, but hearing completely different messages.
Exactly.
Based on our own, like, internal filters.
Yeah.
And that's amplified by, like, the media landscape that we live in, right?
100%. We're all in our own echo chambers, consuming news that reinforces our views.
Exactly.
So when someone like Harris goes on Fox News, it's a huge deal because she's stepping outside of that echo chamber and trying to reach an audience.
Yeah, it's a risky move.
It is.
But it's also, like, potentially a really smart strategic move.
Totally. It could really pay off for her.
But it makes you wonder, like, can you even have a productive conversation in this kind of environment where everyone's so entrenched in their own narratives?
That's the $1 million question. And this interview really highlights just how difficult it is to even find common ground.
It's like everyone's playing, like, 4D chess, and the viewers are just trying to keep up.
And getting lost in the shuffle.
Exactly.
Sorry.
So I guess as we kind of move past this whole enemy with an exchange, what are some of the key takeaways from this interview that we should keep in mind? Not just about Harris and Baier, but about political communication in general.
Well, I think context is everything.
Yeah.
You have to consider who's asking the questions, their background, their audience. All of that factors into how we interpret what's being said.
Absolutely. We can't analyze this interview without acknowledging that it took place on Fox News.
Exactly.
With a Fox News audience.
Yeah. Right. And I think another big takeaway is the importance of framing. We see this throughout the interview, how both Harris and Baier are very carefully choosing their words to try to control the narrative.
It's like a perfectly choreographed dance at times.
It really is.
This back and forth, this push and pull.
And we see Harris navigate some really tricky questions about Biden's age, his fitness. She handles it all with incredible skill.
She does, but it does make you realize, like, how much of it is performance.
Oh, absolutely.
Rather than genuine dialogue.
Yeah. I think that's a really important point.
It's about shaping public perception.
Yeah.
Controlling the narrative.
And ultimately, winning votes.
That's exactly.
That's what it all comes down to.
Which is both fascinating and kind of disheartening. At the same time, like, where's the authenticity? Where's the genuine conversation about these really important issues?
Yeah, it's hard to find these days. And I think that's something that we all need to be more aware of as we consume political news and information.
Because it's easy to get swept up in the drama and the performance of it all.
Exactly.
It's like we're so busy, dissecting the performance that we become almost immune to the actual substance of what's being said.
Yeah, I think that's a real danger because we can get so caught up in analyzing the strategy, the optics, that we forget why we're even paying attention in the first place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What are the actual issues that are at stake here, and how do they affect people's lives?
Yeah.
So it's not enough to just watch these interviews or read the headlines. We have to dig deeper, ask ourselves, what's the agenda here? What's not being said? Who benefits from me interpreting things this way or that way?
Right. We have to be really critical consumers of this information.
Absolutely. We can't just passively consume this stuff. We have to be active participants in shaping the narrative.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Harris interview,
Yeah.
what's the one big takeaway you want to leave our listeners with?
I think it's this. Don't take things at face value. Look beyond the surface. Analyze the language being used, the way things are framed, the strategies being employed. Because often, what's left unsaid is just as important as what's said out loud.
It's a good reminder that we all have a role to play in navigating this complex world of political discourse.
Absolutely. And by engaging critically with the information we consume, asking those tough questions, demanding more from our leaders, we can become more informed citizens and make the best decisions for ourselves and our communities.
Couldn't agree more. Well, there you have it, folks. Our deep dive into that Kamala Harris interview. We got into the political maneuvering, the strategic communication, maybe even had a few aha moments along the way.
We really unpacked how much strategy goes into these interviews and how important it is to be aware of the strategies as viewers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And hopefully we've given you some things to think about as you engage with this election and beyond.
Because this is just the tip of the iceberg. This kind of political theater is happening all around us.
Never ends.
Yeah.
Never ends.
All right. Until next time, keep asking those tough questions. Dive deep.